So I want you to imagine something for a second. You are locked inside this really claustrophobic heavy metal tube, and you are hundreds of feet underwater.
Yeah, not a place for the faint of heart, that's for sure.
Definitely not. And the only illumination in this space comes from this intense, heavy red glow. It's, designed to preserve your night vision. So you're sitting there, silhouetted against these banks of blinking monitors and glowing screens.
Right, and there are absolutely no windows. You're completely blind to the outside.
Exactly. You are completely cut off from the world above. You've got no quick access to help, and there is absolutely no backup coming if things go wrong.
Which is a terrifying thought.
It really is. Your visibility into the outside environment is, well, it's entirely limited to whatever little fragments of data your instruments manage to pick up, like maybe a weird sound signature or a sudden thermal anomaly.
Just tiny blips of information.
Right. And yet, sitting in that chair, you're responsible for making these immediate decisions where the consequences of getting it wrong are absolute and catastrophic.
It is an environment that is basically designed to push human cognitive limits to the absolute breaking point. I mean, you are operating in the dark, you're starved of information, and you're under immense pressure.
Which is exactly why we are jumping into this specific scenario today. Our mission for this deep dive is to explore how leaders can really master the art of decision-making when they're forced to act without having all the facts.
Yeah, because we all face that in different ways.
Oh, totally. Whether you are, prepping for a volatile boardroom meeting or trying to make a really tough call for your family or just managing the daily uncertainties of life, understanding how to act in the dark is a superpower.
It really is.
So today we have a fascinating source document. It's a comparison between military submarine command and civilian child protection. The document is called What a DSL Can Learn from a Submarine Commander.
And just for a bit of context for the listener, a DSL is a designated safeguarding lead. They're the point person in institutions like international boarding schools whose sole job is to protect vulnerable people.
Right. Vulnerable kids, usually.
Exactly. And bridging these two seemingly disconnected worlds, I mean, nuclear submarines and schools safeguarding it, uncovers this really profound universal truth about how humans handle the terrifying reality of uncertainty.
Okay, let's unpack this because the core paradox here is really what initially hooked me.
Yeah.
Put yourself back in that submarine for a sec.
Okay, I'm there.
You see a blip on the sonar. It doesn't match known friendly profiles, but it's not definitively hostile either. The human instinct, like our modern corporate instinct, is to pause.
Right.
We want to gather a committee.
Oh, yeah. Send an email to the Admiral.
Exactly. Request a clearer satellite image, wait for undeniable proof before making a move. But in that pressurized tube, waiting for perfect information isn't just difficult. It is mathematically impossible. The situation is unfolding whether you have the data or not.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Waiting is not neutral. That is the fundamental premise we have to start with here. Waiting is a decision.
Waiting is a decision. Wow.
Right, because when you are moving through a dynamic environment, hitting the pause button in your own mind doesn't stop the world from turning around you.
No, the clock keeps ticking.
Exactly. By choosing to wait for a clearer signal, you are actively deciding to let a potentially hostile situation develop without your intervention. You are surrendering control to the environment.
So if waiting is actually an active choice, we really have to look at why our brains fight so hard against acting on incomplete data. It feels like this paralysis of perfection.
Yeah, paralysis by analysis, right.
Right. Why does our natural human craving to gather all the facts actually create more danger in a high-stakes scenario?
Well, to understand that, we need to look at the mechanics of what the text calls the submarine principle. Submarine commanders are trained from day one to accept that they will almost never have full visibility.
They just have to accept it.
Yeah. They operate in a world totally devoid of certainties. It's like they're assembling a puzzle where half the pieces are missing, the box doesn't have a picture on it, and the table is actively shaking.
That sounds like a nightmare.
It is. But they use fragments. An echo here, a shadow there. They have to interpret the empty space between the data points.
And the translation of that to the role of a safeguarding lead is just hauntingly direct. I mean, a DSL isn't looking at sonar shadows, obviously.
No, but they are looking at behavioral fragments.
Right. They're dealing with, like, a child who suddenly quits the soccer team they used to love. Or they're dealing with partial, mumbled disclosures. Or a student wearing long sleeves in the middle of a sweltering summer.
Exactly. It is never a clear, high-definition picture.
Never. Those are the echoes. And the professional reality of a DSL is that decisions must be made using professional judgment under uncertainty.
Which is a really uncomfortable psychological space to be in.
Oh, definitely, because from a really young age, we are conditioned by the school system to, show our work. We have to find the undeniable proof before raising our hand with the answer.
Yeah, we're penalized for guessing.
Right. But when dealing with vulnerability, waiting for undeniable proof usually means you have waited way too long.
Yeah, and that requires a massive mental shift for a leader. You're moving from asking yourself, do I have enough information, to asking, do I have enough concern to act?
That's a huge pivot. Do I have enough concern to act?
It changes the entire trajectory of leadership because inaction under uncertainty is inherently dangerous. Down in the submarine, waiting for a clearer acoustic signature might mean you lose your tactical advantage. Or worse, you take a torpedo hit.
In a school hallway.
In a school hallway, waiting for a child to explicitly, clearly state they are being abused well, that means you're prolonging their exposure to that abuse. You're allowing the harm to compound while you try to satisfy your own cognitive need for certainty.
Okay, but let me push back on this on behalf of the listener, though, because hearing this, my immediate reaction is, wait, isn't acting without facts deeply reckless?
That's a very common reaction, yeah.
Right. Like, if a DSL acts on a mere hunch or just a bad vibe based on a kid quitting soccer, and they happen to be wrong, I mean, you are talking about initiating investigations into families. You are pulling staff into interrogations. Doesn't that cause massive, unnecessary chaos for everyone?
Well, what's fascinating here is that discomfort is entirely valid. It's a tension that actively has to be managed. But acting on incomplete information isn't about being reckless. It's about understanding the mechanics of thresholds.
Thresholds, okay.
Yeah, you aren't acting on a whim. You're recognizing that the threshold for intervention must purposefully be lower than the threshold for absolute certainty.
Okay, I see what you mean.
Right. If you wait until you are 100% sure a child is in danger, catastrophic harm has already occurred. You have to prioritize safety over completeness.
So the trigger to act isn't, I know for a fact something is wrong. It's more like, the indicators are strong enough that doing nothing is no longer acceptable.
Precisely. You intervene to prevent the worst-case scenario, knowing full well that some percentage of those interventions will turn out to be false alarms.
Which is hard to swallow, but necessary.
A false alarm is actually a feature of a healthy safeguarding system. It's not a bug.
Okay, so if we accept that premise that waiting for perfect certainty is actually a dangerous dereliction of duty, the logical next question is, what exactly are you basing your actions on?
Right.
If you can't evaluate the facts because they literally don't exist yet, how do you evaluate what you can't fully see?
This is where the commander's mindset provides a really clear blueprint. They don't evaluate facts. They evaluate probability and consequence.
Probability and consequence.
Yeah, they're running a constant mental matrix. Like, what is the likelihood that this sonar anomaly is a threat? And more importantly, what is the consequence if it is a threat and I do absolutely nothing?
They weigh the cost of acting against the devastating cost of inaction.
Exactly. And there is a brilliant professional reframe for this in the document. It's about shifting from fact-finding to risk management.
Risk management, not fact-finding.
Yes. Your job as a leader in a crisis isn't to be the detective who, solves the mystery and wraps the case up perfectly with a bow. Your job is to manage the risk of the unknown variables.
Let's ground this in a practical example from the text. So, imagine a DSL receives a report that a usually bubbly student has become incredibly withdrawn. And they gave a very vague, confusing answer when asked about their weekend.
A classic scenario.
Right. A fact finder looks at that and says, well, I don't have enough tangible evidence to take this to social services. I need to wait and observe.
Which, as we established, is dangerous.
Right. But a risk manager looks at the exact same scenario and asks, what is the worst case scenario if I take zero action right now? The risk manager knows that doing nothing is the highest risk option.
Yes, so the action might not be calling the police immediately, right? But it might be escalating the concern to the school counselor or actively logging the behavior and coordinating with other teachers to increase vigilance.
So what does this all mean? It's almost like buying insurance.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Right. When you pay your homeowner's insurance premium, you do not know for an absolute fact that your house is going to catch fire. The current verifiable facts state that your house is completely fine.
Safe and sound.
But the probability of a fire exists, however small, And the consequence of doing nothing, like losing your home and everything in it without a safety net, is so catastrophic that you make the decision to act and buy the policy anyway. You spend capital right now to mitigate a theoretical disaster.
That is a highly functional way to view it. In leadership, you are spending social capital or organizational resources or time to buy down the risk of a catastrophic outcome. You are ensuring the situation against the worst-case scenario.
I understand the logic. I really do. But constantly running those worst-case scenario calculations, that sounds incredibly anxiety-inducing.
It is. It's exhausting.
If a leader is perpetually operating on risk and the potential for catastrophe, how do they actually handle that intense psychological pressure without just panicking and making things worse?
The psychological burden is immense, you're right. But let's look at the biology of what happens in that submarine environment. Because despite the life or death stakes, the bridge of a submarine is notoriously quiet. It is fiercely controlled.
Which is wild to think about.
They do not tolerate panic because panic biologically degrades your ability to make decisions.
And when you say biologically degrades, you mean the literal brain chemistry?
Yes, exactly. When panic sets in, your amygdala, which is the brain's fear center, it basically hijacks your nervous system.
Right, the fight or flight response.
Exactly. It floods your body with cortisol and adrenaline, and that biological response literally shuts down your prefrontal cortex. That's the part of your brain responsible for logic, complex planning, and rational decision-making.
Oh, wow. So you literally can't think straight.
You get tunnel vision, you default to fight, flight, or freeze. And freezing, in this context, is just another word for waiting.
So for a safeguarding lead, this is arguably even harder to manage than it is for a submarine captain.
How so?
Well, the captain is looking at glowing green screens and listening to mechanical pings. A DSL is looking into the eyes of a terrified child. They're dealing with angry defensive parents or panicked teachers. The emotional volatility of the environment is off the charts. Yet they are required to be the calmest person in the system.
Yeah, but being the calmest person in the system isn't just a personality trait. You don't just wake up one day immune to stress.
Right, I'd hope not.
It is a structural requirement that you have to build. You have to construct what the text calls an architecture of calm. It means actively slowing down your own physiological response so you don't just react to the loudest voice or the most terrifying implication in the room.
See, I have to challenge the practical application of this. It's really easy for us to sit here in a studio, calmly discussing brain chemistry and say, just stay calm.
Sure.
But when you are the one sitting across the desk and a child's physical safety is actively on the line, how do you actually enforce that quiet control in a system where everyone else's emotions are naturally running so high?
You do it by recognizing that your isolation is an illusion. We think of the submarine commander as being alone at the bottom of the ocean.
Right, the lone hero.
But they aren't operationally alone. They rely on their mechanical systems, their highly trained crew, and years of rigorous, drilled procedures. When the alarm sounds, they don't have to invent a response from scratch. They execute a predetermined protocol.
So the system acts as an external prefrontal cortex.
Exactly that. A DSL sitting in an office with an enraged parent might feel entirely alone. The physical isolation is real, but the operational isolation is perceived, not actual.
Oh, that's a crucial distinction.
They have institutional policies, legal safeguarding frameworks, and a network of designated authorities to fall back on. Trusting established processes is key.
So a framework isn't just bureaucratic red tape.
Not at all. It is a cognitive off-ramp. When your brain is flooded with stress, you don't have to creatively problem solve. You open the binder, literal or metaphorical, and you follow the checklist. You lean on the established process to absorb the emotional weight of the moment. You aren't making a wild guess in the dark. You are executing a framework.
That makes the concept of a policy feel much more vital. It's not just a rule book to keep you out of trouble. It's the mechanism that allows you to breathe and act when you are terrified.
Exactly.
But that leads us into a really crucial reality check regarding the aftermath of these decisions. Because even with the best frameworks and the calmest mindset, if you take action based on incomplete fragments of information, eventually someone is going to scrutinize that action.
Oh, inevitably.
So how do you survive the fallout of making a tough call?
This comes down to the professional standard of defensibility. Every decision you make under uncertainty must be logical, it must be based on whatever data was available to you at that precise moment, and it must be highly defensible. Yeah. There is an ultimate accountability question that the text poses to the listener, and every leader should ask themselves this before taking action. If your decision was reviewed tomorrow, could you explain exactly why you acted as you did?
Notice the phrasing of that question, though. It doesn't ask, were you right? It asks, can you explain why you acted?
That distinction is everything. You can be factually wrong about the outcome. The child wasn't actually in danger or the anomaly wasn't a torpedo, but you can still have made the completely correct defensible decision based on the risk indicators present at the time.
Because you evaluated the fragments.
Right. You applied the framework and you mitigated the worst case scenario.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. We hit the honest bit from the text. This is where the comparison between the military commander and the civilian safeguarding lead completely fractures.
Yeah, the analogy does break down here.
Because a submarine operates in total secrecy. The commander's ultimate strategic goal is to hide in the shadows, remain undetected, and leave absolutely no trace that they were ever there.
Whereas a DSL operates under the expectation of intense accountability.
Right.
They seek child protection outcomes, and that requires multi-agency collaboration. They are coordinating with social services, local police, medical professionals, school boards. Their actions are designed to be seen.
Exactly. The submarine commander succeeds by hiding in the shadows.
Hmm.
But the DSL has to make their risky, uncertain decisions, knowing that they will eventually have to stand under a massive spotlight of accountability. Every input, every conversation, every choice is going to be scrutinized under a microscope.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, that is exactly why rigorous, almost obsessive record-keeping is the DSL's armor. When that spotlight turns on for a multi-agency review, you cannot rely on saying, well, I just had a bad feeling.
No, that won't hold up.
You need the black box data. You need your logged rationales. You need the specific behavioral indicators you observed, the alternative actions you weighed and discarded, and the exact threshold that triggered your intervention. That documentation is the armor that protects the DSL. It proves you acted as a responsible, calibrated professional managing risk, rather than someone just reacting to panic.
It takes the decision out of the realm of emotion and puts it into the realm of structured logic, which really brings us to the broader implications for anyone leading a team or building an organization. This is the leadership layer.
Right, because you don't have to be on a submarine or in a school to apply this.
Exactly. If you are a leader, you set the weather for your team. You dictate the culture.
And a strong leadership culture ensures that the people operating under you are not paralyzed by the fear of uncertainty. There is a systemic question from the text we all have to ask about our organizations. Do your systems support decision-making under uncertainty, or do they unintentionally encourage delay?
Think about the mechanics of that. If your organization severely punishes employees for making defensible, risk-managed decisions that occasionally turn out to be false alarms, you are actively training them to freeze.
You're teaching them it's safer to do nothing.
Right. You are teaching them that it is professionally safer for them to let the house catch fire before they call the fire department. Because if they call early and there is no fire, they get reprimanded.
You are incentivizing the dangerous choice of waiting. To counteract that, a culture must actively mandate assessment and action. It demands absolute discipline to follow the frameworks. It demands the courage to face the uncomfortable void of missing data. And it demands choosing informed, structured decision-making over the comfortable, dangerous illusion of perfect certainty.
Assess, decide, act. It's about having the tools and the backing to move forward in the dark, using whatever instruments you have, rather than waiting indefinitely for the sun to come out.
Well said.
It leaves us with a core carrying question from the text to filter our own daily challenges through. Am I waiting for certainty in a situation that actually requires action?
It's a question that feels increasingly urgent, especially the more technologically advanced we get.
It truly does.
Yeah.
And to wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, something that builds entirely on this whole premise of uncertainty. We currently live in a world that is fundamentally obsessed with data gathering.
Oh, completely.
We're training algorithms and artificial intelligence to require massive, nearly infinite data sets before they can make a single move or recommendation. We are building our entire infrastructure around systems that literally cannot function without 100% of the variables being known.
We are outsourcing our decision-making to machines that are entirely intolerant of the dark.
So if we condition our entire society, our businesses, and our future leaders to only act when we have 100% of the data, are we actively unlearning the distinctly human superpower of making courageous, intuitive decisions in the dark?
That is a terrifying thought.
If we lose the ability to sit in that claustrophobic red-lit room, look at the incomplete shadows on the screen, and still have the guts to make the call, what happens when the data doesn't come? Something to explore on your own the next time you find yourself hitting pause, waiting for just a little more information. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.